Gudrun looked over the desolation that spanned the courtyard and pulled her shawl tighter, as if able to block the horror before her. Along the battlement the dead lay. Blood painted Gudrun's arms from the seamless, endless wounded that filled the great hall. There was no one left in the courtyard, no work left to be done, but she couldn't bring herself to stay away. A cold wind swept in from the sea and caught on Lorlenalin's chariots to funnel down to the courtyard. Gudrun looked to the sky. The clouds had begun to clear. The light of the moon's crescent spilled over the white, blood-stained stone. "Lady Gudrun!" The worry in Eilif's voice pulled Gudrun's attention from the sky. His voice felt unnaturally alive among so much death. Like smooth rain, he glided across the courtyard. His tall, skinny frame left him looking ragged and worn in the dark. Gudrun looked at the scribe over and assessed his condition. The concoction she had given him earlier did well to ease his nerves and left him with a visible empty hurt that reflected her own heartache. "Have you found her yet?" he asked. His voice wavered as if he would break. Unable to speak, Gudrun lowered her swollen eyes to the ground. She couldn't see that look on another face one more time. "No, that was the last of them," she said. "Any sight of Dagon?" Eilif shook his head. "I haven't seen him." Turning her back, Gudrun crossed the vast courtyard once more, scanning the rows of dead faces for Kallans. The wind whipped her long silver hair across her face. Her blood-stained chemise trailed to the ground, catching on debris that pulled at her skirts as she walked. Gudrun hugged herself tighter against the chill. "Lady Gudrun!" The old Sitkona turned to the scribe. In another lifetime he had so eagerly embraced his studies alongside Kallan as they committed countless ancient runes to memory. Together they played, mapped the city, and collected the children from the streets. She watched the last of Eilif's youth fade before her eyes as he shouldered the same grief that haunted them all. "Lady Kallan!" Eilif lost the words, seemingly unable to muster the strength to speak them. The shuffling feet carried to the courtyard and drew Gudrun's attention to the corridor. "Oh!" she gasped as Eric emerged from the passage with Dagon, unconscious, supported over his shoulder. Burnt flesh and blood marred his face in gouges of black and red. The wild copper mop of hair matted the nearest places singed to the bloody scalp, and his grizzled beard had melted completely away in places. The burns disfigured the length of his right side to his hip and extended across his torso. To her knees Gudrun fell, pulling Eric to the ground with her. Eilif bent over Gudrun's shoulder as she scrambled with her scythe pouch and withdrew a vial. With shaking hands, she poured a droplet of golden liquid into Dagon's mouth while muttering beneath her breath. Golden sprays of scythe light flowed from her hand as she inspected the injury and immediately set to work to heal him. "Will he live?" Eric asked, panting to catch his breath beside her. She shook her head, her brow furrowed, and submitted another drop onto the burns. Sharply she gasped and halted the spell. Her hands shook, and the blood left her face as her thoughts turned to wilder things, buried in the lands beyond the sea. "I know this scythe," she breathed, and looked at Eric, who held his gaze hardened and cold. "Where did you find him, Eric?" Gudrun said. "The stables," Eric said, staring back with a look that revealed too little from Gudrun to read. "Is he dead?" Eilif asked. "No," Gudrun said, and returned her attention to Dagon. "Not yet, anyway." "Will he live?" Eric asked. Gudrun tried to pull back the cloth that had fused with the skin near his waist. After a brief examination, she released the fabric and inspected the burns that extended across his chest. The exposed skin on his right side had partly melted away. She shook her head, forcing down a sob caught in her throat. "It's too soon." "Was Kallan there? Did you see her?" Eilif asked. Eric shook his head. "The last I saw of her was the third-floor corridor. We were ambushed," he said. "I sent her onto the stables." Gudrun listened to the regret that clung to his voice while administering another drop of liquid. Too much remained unclear, unanswered. Ever since she had fallen asleep, her mind had been clouded. Recent events flowed together, and there were places where complete thoughts were missing. They had waited for an attack from the Dauphin that never came. There was... Gudrun began the long task of siphoning her say through Dagon, while she tried to sort through the garbled confusion. She had tried to remember how she had come to be lying on the ground, surrounded by dead and injured. Kallan was missing. Yet not a single sword swung, not a single arrow released, that she could remember anyway. For several minutes they stayed there, unmoving, all peering over Dagon as Gudrun worked. The scribe run his hands together, stopping now and again to chew on his thumbnail while he waited. Gudrun administered another drop on his burns, and the first flinch of relief came when Dagon took in a long gasp that he released with a howl. "Hold him down," Gudrun ordered, then proceeded with the spell. Together, Eilif and Eric pinned Dagon's arms, holding him against the stone as he bellowed and grunted from the pain. The Sidcona continued knitting the fibers, repairing the flesh until Dagon ceased his fight and eased up. His breath slowed as he found its regular pace. He spoke, panting on the ground through the pain. "Where is she, Dagon?" Eric asked, shouting the words loud enough for Dagon to hear through the unconsciousness. Gudrun and Eilif looked to Eric. "Kallan! Dagon!" Eric cried. "Did you see her?" Dagon's voice cracked and scraped against his dry throat. Gudrun administered another droplet into his mouth. Dagon gulped, licking the sweet nectar of Idun's apples, as the Sidcona dropped a third into his cracked lips. Before their eyes they watched the raw, burned splits close themselves. "Took her," Dagon said between breaths. Gudrun furrowed her brow, uncertain about the blanket daze in Dagon's eyes. "No wonder the dark one pulled out so suddenly," Eric said. "He took—" Dagon tried again, choked by the visible wave of guilt that overwhelmed him. Shh. Gudrun hushed, returning to work on his face. "Sleep now," she bade as she repaired his skin with her save. "Eilif," Gudrun said, still mending the wound splayed over his body. "We'll be ready to move him soon. Go fetch help." Without hesitation, Eilif fled down the passage to the great hall. "Will he die?" Eric asked, seeming to know she had held back with the scribe nearby. Gudrun shook her head, her attention glazed with a newfound determination. "It will take me the night, and most of the day." She looked up from Dagon. "But I think I got to him in time." Eric nodded as Eilif returned with 2 men in a large fur. They moved per Gudrun's orders, shifting Dagon to the fur and carrying him back to the great hall. "I'll need Uthbert's irons and the tailor's needles," Gudrun said. "Odin knows I can do most of this on my own, but I will need help. And I'll need water," She called to Eilif, who had almost vanished into the corridor. "Cut back his clothes so I can better see what I'm working with." She spoke these last few words to herself as Eilif slipped from sight. "Gudrun," Eric said, grabbing her arm as she rolled up her sleeves with shaking hands. "I'll need my supply of apples brought down from my chamber," she said. "I'll need to use what I can to save him." "Gudrun, if the Dark One has taken her, there will be no hope for her." Gudrun pursed her lips as her widened eyes filled with tears. "We can't afford the men," Eric said with an empathetic tone. "With Dagon near death and Kallan gone?" Gudrun rubbed her eyes with the back of her bloody hand. "I don't have the men to go after her," he said. The old woman pulled her hand from her eyes. A streak of blood smeared her face. "What are you saying?" Gudrun asked. "Gudrun," Eric said, his voice cut through the silence like a cold, blunt knife. A breeze slashed against Gudrun's legs, but she didn't seem to notice. "We can't help her. Kallan is on her own." The gold in Gudrun's eyes brightened with rage. "Kallan has Kira's strength, no matter how dormant it may be. Do not underestimate her ability to survive this." "The chances are slim," Eric said, "and I cannot spare the aid." "Why do you do this?" she breathed. "As long as the queen is missing," Eric said, "my station requires that I put the needs of Lorlenalin first. And if that means turning my back on a queen so that her people may live, then so be it." "You never had a place here." Gudrun spoke unusually low. "Never among these people." "I told you that when you came here." Eric's chest rose and fell as Gudrun tested his temper. The etching on his chest caught the streaks of moonlight. "I know what you did to her," Gudrun said. "Do not think I don't know why you're really here." Eric matched the hatred in Gudrun's face. "Those were different days, Gudrun. I did what I had to do then. I'm doing what I have to do now. Do not make my mistake, but do not mistake my duty to Lorlenalin as a lack of concern for that girl. I pledged my allegiance to Eilf when I left." A raven cawed in the distance, and Eric clenched his jaw, refusing to say more. "That girl," Gudrun said, "is Kira's daughter. Don't think I have forgotten." Eric took in a long, deep breath at Kira's name, a fact I'm reminded of each time I see her eyes. "Her blood flows with mine," Gudrun whispered. "That Saidline stems from mine." "I am aware." "So are they!" Gudrun's raised whisper caught the wind, and nervously she and Eric looked to the sky, as if waiting for the clouds to swoop down and smite them. Gudrun exhaled, still shifting a worried glance to the sea. The night had grown calm. "I've held your secret this long, Gudrun," Eric said. "I don't want them to find her any more than you do. I have done much, too much, to let you abandon Kallan to the wolves," Gudrun said, "nor will I stand by while you abandon our queen." The wind rustled, funneling down to the courtyard from above. "I will heal the men of Kallan's armies," Gudrun said, turning her back to the sea. "I will heal Dagon and repair their wounds. Then let's see you tell Dagon he isn't going after Kira's daughter." Pulling her shawl around her shoulders, Gudrun dragged her forlorn body to the passage, leaving Eric staring at the single raven perched on Lorlenalin's balustrade.